So first, let me say thank you to all of you who have submitted questions. Your questions are very thoughtful, and there are lots of them, so we may not be able to get through all of them. But I do want to start with Lynda. You have quite a few questions here, which is interesting because I think so many of us forget if we live in the Triangle area or we live in more urban areas, we often forget about our agricultural economy here in North Carolina. So as someone whose parents grew up on farms in rural North Carolina, children of sharecroppers, I'm also very interested in agriculture. So I want to start with you. One of the things that was interesting to me is the statistics around the age of the farmers. In particular, young farmers. I think there were 5,500 young farmers as opposed to 76,000 farmers, and the average age, I think, is 58. So what are young farmers growing? That was one question. And then my follow-up question to that is, how do we engage young people to start farming?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, especially with the last few years, it's been tough in agriculture. We've been hit by hurricanes and trade wars and all kinds of things. But there are so many new fields, just like you were talking about. There are so many new fields in agriculture, whether it's ag biotech or precision ag. That part of the field is mind-blowing. But to encourage them, I think we've got to show that the new farmers that you can make a profit. Profitability is key. You can't have a business that keeps losing money. So by showing them what we're doing now with research and technology, that we've got to show them that, yes, there is hope for the future, and that we can all pull together, but there's also more outside the farm when it comes to landing an ag job or staying in the ag field. There's just so many more opportunities, ones that we probably don't even know about at this point. But that is part of the struggle, to educate people on the number of ag jobs out there. But I tell you, though, that the farmers that are there and the young farmers that are there are extremely passionate about what they're doing, and they can do so much more than, say, their grandparents did or their great-grandparents on the farm. They can get so much more out of their farm today than they could years and years ago.
Yeah, I also think about how a lot of young people who are starting businesses want to be more social entrepreneurs, so solve like social problems. And so I can see how even your first question, being able to engage young farmers around helping to solve social issues while also taking care of their families and communities. So that's good. Thank you. All right, so Christopher, thank you for your presentation. One of the questions that was asked of you was actually answered, which was, what are the top 3 reasons or top 3 factors that people look at in terms of relocating to a place? But this question in particular is, why are companies particularly coming to North Carolina? Like, what would be the top 3 reasons why a company would say, okay, yes, North Carolina is it?
Well, I think we're winning a lot as a state to compete for companies, largely because of the talent issue that I talked about. Again, doesn't absolve us of the need to think forward about how we'll continue to be well-positioned for talent. But I think when companies look holistically at North Carolina, what they see is a really good picture on the talent front, which, as I said, is king right now in terms of top concerns. Ben had it up there showing just our population growth compared to the national average. I think it was 10% at a state level compared to 6% nationally. Strong in migration. We're just a couple clicks below Georgia when it comes to population. We will likely leapfrog them by the time the 2030 census comes around. So our population, our workforce picture is this. We've got a world-class university system. The UNC system, along with private universities like Wake Forest, Duke, Elon, hard to debate the quality of the collegiate university education that we offer. Our community college system that I talked about, 58 community colleges, you're nowhere further than 30 minutes away from any of these campuses, anywhere you go in North Carolina, a great proving ground to develop the talent people need. Whether you're going there for a 2-year degree, whether you're spending your first 2 years there going to a university, or whether you're customizing your training for the needs of a specific industry, community colleges are great. We've got this military presence that a lot of people forget about if they're anywhere west of this region. We've got 120,000 active duty military in North Carolina at Camp Lejeune, Fort Bragg, Seymour Johnson, Cherry Point. That's a great transitioning workforce that's also available to companies. And then add to those 3 things this in-migration that Ben talked about. People moving here from the Northeast, from the Midwest, from California, from our neighboring states, oftentimes in that younger working age cohort. Again, we get our share of retirees, nothing wrong, that brings money in. But the people that companies care about is that prime working age, 25 to 55. And we look really good on the in-migration stats. Again, a lot of that's concentrated up and down I-85, but it paints a really good picture if you're in North Carolina, even better picture if you're Raleigh, Greensboro, or Charlotte, and you can point to those statistics. That's why I think we're winning.
Real quick, if I can. So I think that's a good point, but also economic developers are looking for different things, don't you think, than in the past? Because in the past it was more kind of cheap power, cheap land, those kind of things were like your basic check, punch lists and such. But I've noticed that these days it seems like people are really looking more for quality of life, healthcare, education, and environment as well.
I mean, those things matter to the extent if you're a company, and corporate headquarters are a great example. So the Raleigh region has won Advanced Auto Parts. They moved their corporate headquarters here last year. Honeywell moved from New Jersey to Charlotte. When you talk about corporate headquarters, they're oftentimes trying to bring that specific skill set of employees from wherever they are today to the new location. And yes, the attractiveness of that location will dictate how successful that company is in holding on to those key employees and convincing them to make the move to the new headquarters location. And if you don't have good health care, if you have a ton of traffic congestion, if public safety is a concern, bad schools are a concern, it's going to be that much harder to sell your employees to make that move with you, which is why all those issues are absolutely important.
So speaking to that, I guess to that end, I'm thinking about this particular question, and I'm always mindful when we are speaking, we're sitting in Raleigh, which is our state's capital, and we're speaking about our state as a whole. And oftentimes we seem to sometimes focus on our urban centers. So people who move from another place here or move to Charlotte from somewhere else. Anytime I have friends that move here from other places and they kind of, think the triangle is North Carolina, I say, no, let's take a little drive. And they have to get outside of the urban area and see that much of our state is very rural. So this question speaks to that. What can the state do to ensure struggling rural areas participate in the opportunities so plentiful in our major urban centers?
You go for it. I'll start.
I think highlight those places. And I've just noticed, am I the only person not wearing one of these? Y'all, man. Sorry. Now I look better. Excuse me. Confidence level. I think that essentially we talk about this all the time. This is a ongoing factor in our magazine, and everything that we talk about is this rural-urban divide a little bit. And I think the key thing is that one thing we can do as a state is really promote the things that are happening in some of our rural areas across. So Kinston's a great example. If anybody's been to Kinston, you've seen what they're trying to do there, and you have some real good proponents of some of the growth there, obviously with the restaurant, along with kind of the arts and culture kind of aspects of that. And that's something very different than Kinston that you wouldn't think of in eastern North Carolina. So it's a revitalization of some of the downtowns in those areas as well. We were talking about Wilson earlier with a T. So Wilson obviously has become an incredible bedroom community for the Triangle because of things like that. So it's developing its own thing. You have to have people that are in town that are really supporting entrepreneurship in those areas as much as any other places. And the state needs to get behind that. I think it is to a degree. But you also have everybody has to be working together, your community college system in terms of training folks, your economic development groups, and your chambers of commerce. So that's the key thing. The thing that scares me a little bit is that, I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of these folks and some of the largest employers, but the hospitals and the healthcare in some of these areas that are shutting down in many ways because they just don't have the capacity to support that area. So that's one thing we need to work out, and that could be an area where we would need some support.
It's really just about supplying the basics for some of these communities, because I talked about broadband. That is such a huge issue for people in rural America. Some of these places have dial-up still, and they're waiting forever. I just saw a tweet this morning from one of our farmers in Johnston County, and he was doing a test on his signal, and he was paying for, I think he said like 10 megabytes, I don't know the technology, and he did a test, and it was like less than 1%. So, I mean, broadband is a big issue, and it's technology-driven as we are today. If you're not giving people the opportunity to use that, they're going to leave. And I know the USDA has been just handed out several $1 million in grants to try to bring more broadband to more rural parts of North Carolina, but more has to be done.
Yeah, so That was actually a question, two individuals sent that question about broadband, Wi-Fi, and why is it so difficult to get broadband to those areas?
I think it comes down to money.
Yeah, I mean, it's the last mile piece of it is, I mean, middle mile we're doing really well. We've got MCNC, which is a state-supported nonprofit. But yeah, the last mile of infrastructure is key. I mean, I'd say back to the earlier question, I mean, education and infrastructure are clearly the ways that states can address this from a policy standpoint, right? Again, we've got some great resources helping rural North Carolina here in this state. So the Rural Center, that's a fantastic resource. Hopefully many of you are familiar with that. Golden Leaf Foundation, of course, is doing tremendous amounts in rural North Carolina. But these challenges are not unique to us, they're national. So education is great because if the jobs are not there in rural North Carolina or rural America, you need to be able to teach and give these people the education and skills where they can go pursue the jobs that will allow them to support themselves and their families. And maybe one day they will move back to those communities. But if there's nothing there for them today, you've got to give them the education where they can go secure economic opportunity. Same thing with infrastructure. Infrastructure shortens the distance between the haves and the have-nots. Broadband is a great example of that. Whether you're starting a company and you need that internet access, whether you're trying to do distance education or telemedicine, broadband is key to enabling those things. Physical infrastructure like our roads, again, whether that's good highways, whether that's bus rapid transit, whether that's commuter rail. I see Joe Malazzo from the Regional Transportation Alliance. If you can shorten the commute for people to come to where the jobs are from where they live today, that's another way you can try to bridge these divides. But these are not easy issues. They're just, understand, they're not unique to North Carolina. It's something we see really all over the U.S., if not the whole world.
And the key thing is for us as leaders, it's for us to have the foresight to make those investments like folks did in terms of RTP and the Biotech Center, that you may not see the fruits of that for a generation or something like that, but you have to invest in that knowing that's, it's a good investment, a solid investment, and you may not get that quick return on it.
So I want to go back to the talent gap because there have been quite a few questions. I also have questions about this. So what ideas do you all have? And I have a specific question around, one, what are businesses doing to help close that talent gap? So Christopher, you spoke a minute ago about businesses relocating to North Carolina and then some of their employees actually moving here to work for those companies, and then sometimes they hire individuals who are already here. But what are businesses, specifically what are businesses doing to help close the talent gap? And then the second part of the question is, what sort of ideas do you all have, since we're talking about advancing NC, moving forward in a purposeful way, making progress, what ideas do you all have around closing that talent gap? Like some things that may not have been done yet.
What are businesses doing?
Yes, so that's part one.
Complaining.
He said complaining. He said complaining.
No, I think we hear it, like I said earlier, we hear it all the time. We can't find the right people and things like that. And one thing that we're blessed with in North Carolina is an incredible community college system. So we are have a very good discussion with our businesses in the community college system as well. We ask, what do you need? How can we help you get there? And training programs develop, and they work in coordination with a lot of businesses here. In terms of, and that's happening as well with our higher education, our universities and people like that. I think that our universities are getting a little bit more into economic development than they have in the past in terms of how can we help out the workforce, how can we train what you're looking for in the future by talking to a lot more business. There's a lot more communication than I believe there was in the past, which is a good thing. But it's just, for right now, it is basically, you have to figure out what businesses are looking for. They have to give you the specific requirements they're looking for, especially for knowledge jobs. And it's just our ability as a state to answer those things.
I think the smart companies are investing in their people. I mentioned the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Garner in my remarks. So Amazon has a corporate-wide program. I think it's called Career Choice, but they'll basically reimburse employees for credentials or degree training, even if it has nothing to do with anything that they might be doing in Amazon. Obviously, they want to focus on things that are helpful to Amazon, but they know that they don't want to be the barrier to their employees' future growth. So if you go visit the Garner operation, which I think will get operational here later this spring, They actually have a classroom set aside in the first floor of that building. And so other employees of Amazon, as they're coming on and off shift, can see some of their colleagues that are sitting in there doing some of the distance education courses that are subsidized or reimbursed by Amazon as part of its career choice program. Amazon is smart. They know that some of these trends I talked about, artificial intelligence, robotics, that's going to displace a lot of the jobs that Amazon relies on today. So I think they're making those investments to create a workforce that's going to have the skills that Amazon thinks they'll need in 5 or 10 years. I think states have a role, communities, if they can subsidize companies to help do that. Again, it's an expensive proposition. Not every company has the cash that Amazon can invest in that. But I think companies that are looking out for the employees are going to invest in their development and growth, but that can be helped by public policy tools. So hopefully that addresses both questions.
Yeah, it does. And there's another question I wanted to ask. So what do you think, and this question was for you, Christopher, specifically, what do you think about the potential of formerly incarcerated individuals as part of the talent development solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's, again, that shows you just how fierce the fight for any kind of talent is. I mean, it's not quite to the point where if you've got a pulse, you'll get a job anywhere, but it's about as close to that cliche as you can get. Career reentry is one of those emerging fields you're seeing in workforce development. We hosted a conference back in the fall where we had someone from Western North Carolina, Philip Cooper is his name. Hopefully, if you get a chance, hear him speak, because he is formerly, I think, 15 years in the penal system. He came out, got some great mentorship, and now mentors others who are coming out of incarceration to seek self-supporting job opportunities. That is one of many solutions. When you talk about how companies are looking out there for talent, that has to be part of the solution. Now, again, that's where public policy can come into play. You've got initiatives like Ban the Box, for example, other things like that that can ease the transition. Now, that's not going to work for every field. If it's a highly secure or sensitive privacy type field, that's going to be harder for employers to hire people who have a felony on their background. But there's going to be plenty of employment opportunities where people should get the second chance once they come out of the penal system. What can policy do to support that? Again, we don't get into politics or policy of things, but we see employers increasingly focused on different solutions that you didn't hear about 10 years ago, including career reentry.
Yeah, public opinion's changed a little bit on that whole thing, I think. We have folks that are using that. As a matter of fact, one of our Small Business of the Year finalists worked with folks that have been in the penal system, and it was used as a marketing angle for them and stuff like that. So I think that's changed.
So I think this will be the last question. So Ben, when you presented, you focused a little bit on, and this is a politics question, so you focused a little bit on how many in our state are now unaffiliated. They're purple. They're not choosing to be Democrats or Republicans. So how does that either help or hinder our growth as a state? And then I have a part 2, but I want you all to answer that first.
I think it's that way across the country, quite frankly. I think we've got a really interesting history in that, we used to be very democratic in terms of the state itself, but we were also kind of conservative in terms of how we deal with things in terms of business and stuff like that. So we've always been kind of a strange hybrid, I think North Carolina has been. But I believe that now with this influx of folks, and what we're seeing, and I think somebody mentioned that in the Daily Digest, is that our rural areas are more conservative now. Our urban areas are a little more in terms of the blue, very democratic, a little more liberal and such. And I think we've always been very good at kind of negotiating that. And I think that's going to be our big challenge right now. But I don't see it as a bad thing in terms of having folks that are unaffiliated. I think that's just a trend that's happening anymore, because no one wants to be just identified as one deal and such, especially the younger generation and such. They do not want to be pinned down from that standpoint. So I look at it as a benefit. And I like the fact that people are paying attention to us and what we're going to do. And I still see, when you look at national news, I think people look at us as like a litmus test, especially when you're talking about southern states as well, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, so part 2 of that question, and this is for each one of you if you choose to answer. So in terms of that and people coming together on particular issues, or at least trying to find common ground, not choosing a side, From your perspective, what are the issues that really should unite us and help us find common ground? So from your perspective, I know, Christopher, you talked about protein manufacturing and how I personally like Beyond Burger a little bit better than Impossible. But those are issues that everyone is talking about, regardless of your political affiliation. Those are things that we all are concerned about. So what would be some of those issues that could help North Carolinians, regardless of their political affiliation, find that common ground and commonality to advance NC?
Almost every issue you can think of, and I'll tell you why. As long as people talk face to face and do it and have a dialogue, that's the key thing. What's driving me crazy is social media. No one's talking to each other. They're silos, and they just can spout stuff all the time, and it's unbelievable. Talk to people face to face, and we will agree on way more things than we disagree on.
I think growing a healthy rural economy. We need healthy rural areas, and we need healthy urban areas, and they work together, and they both need each other. And I think the urban-rural divide, that's become one of those sort of buzzwords, but it's real, and it's there, and it's getting worse. And we need to address that.
I mean, that answer changes as I've learned in 8 weeks. It changes if you have a kid or not, right? Because now these are things that I need to think about for my own child's sake. To Lynda's point, I mean, I think, so in economic development, we've heard a lot more emphasis in I'd say the past 5 years on growing disparities between kind of different income classes, right? So whether that's economic mobility, whether that's, we call that income inequality, and ultimately that's not good for any society if that gap gets too large. I mean, that's when things can get really bad and really disrupted if you have too much of a separation and people on the bottom don't have any pathway or see no pathway for themselves to get to the top. That's not good. And regardless of whether you're an RD or independent, that, I think hopefully people can agree that that's not the America that was envisioned when this country was founded. I mean, the second thing, and again, this is can be a polarizing issue, but if what climate science suggests is true or even part true, that's going to have a tremendous impact on areas like North Carolina that are exposed with 300 miles of coastline. I mean, those are probably the kinds of issues that you've looked 30, 50, 100 years from now, people in this room are going to be wrestling with what the outcomes of these two issues are. Hopefully we can make a little dent in our time on the planet here to make that a better future, but these are not issues to grapple with.
That's right. Thank you.